Hey folks, welcome to another episode of Cutter One. I am your host, Jay, your resident culture warrior and your resident troublemaker. I hope you all had an amazing weekend. All right, let's get right into it because the crap is flying fast and loose this Monday morning, which is when you'll see this. I'm actually recording these on Sunday night, but let's jump right into it. Okay, the Crow reboots controversy and original director's comments explained. All right. So it says the Crow reboot has attracted controversy, chiefly from the original film's director, who believes that it is disrespectful to Brandon Lee's memory. The Crow reboot has generated quite a lot of controversy, especially with the original film's director, Alex Proyas. The reboot is being helmed by the Ghost in the Shell 2017 director Rupert Sanders. It and Barbarian star Bill Skarsgård is playing the lead role of Eric Draven, a musician who comes back to life in order to avenge his own death as well as that of his fiancée. The reboot has had a troubled production, spending nearly 14 years in development hell before filming finally commenced in the spring of 2022 with a reported budget of $50 million. Post-production on the Crow reboot then began in September 2022. Much of the backlash to the Crow reboot concerns the accidental death of Brandon Lee on set during the production of the original 1994 film. Many people, including Proyas, believe that rebooting The Crow is disrespectful to Lee's memory as they treat the original film as a tribute to the talent of the late actor. Others believe that the Crow reboot is okay, as the character did not originate with Lee. Either way, Skarsgård has a difficult task of following Lee's final and exemplary performance. Some argue that rebooting The Crow is okay despite Lee's death, due to the character's origin as a comic book character. The Crow began life as a comic book character, debuting in Caliber Presents #1 in January 1989. The character was created by writer and artist James O'Barr. The reboot is also considered as a readaptation of O'Barr's comics, rather than a strict remake of Alex Proyas' supposedly cursed The Crow movie. This adds a degree of separation to the Crow reboot when compared to the original. Sequels to the original The Crow movie already exist. There are an additional 3 films to the Crow franchise, not counting the upcoming reboot, with 3 separate actors taking up the mantle of The Crow: Vincent Perez, Eric Mabius, and Terminator 2 Judgment Day's Edward Furlong. However, all 3 of the Crow sequels were received terribly by critics, with 2005's The Crow: A Wicked Prayer considered the very nadir of the franchise. A TV series titled The Crow: Stairway to Heaven was also aired in 1998, starring John Wick Chapter 3's Mark Dacascos as Eric Draven. This means that another actor has already played Draven following Brandon Lee's death. In contrast to The Crow's despised film sequels, Stairway to Heaven actually received somewhat positive reviews. Despite that, the show was canceled after only one 22-episode-long season. This was partially due to another accidental death on set in a similar circumstances to Lee's death during the production of The Crow. Stuntman Mark Ackerstream was killed when flying debris struck his head during a special effects explosion on August 15, 1998. Considering the incredibly negative reception of the sequels and the short-lived television show, it's perhaps appropriate for The Crow, a franchise with a major theme of resurrection, to be rebooted. The director of the original The Crow movie, Alex Proyas, is strongly against the reboot. Speaking on a podcast in 2019, Proyas explained that he has tried to quash reboots of The Crow due to his viewing of the movie as the legacy of Brandon Lee. The director claimed that, despite Eric Draven's origins on the page, Brandon Lee truly brought the character to life. He also stated that he only completed The Crow after production was shut down due to Lee's death, due to the quality of Brandon's performance. Proyas believed that any attempt to remake The Crow is disrespectful to Lee's legacy. Despite saying that he has attempted to stop The Crow remake, Proyas professed that his objections had no impact on the reboot's troubled production. In 2008, the director of the original iconic 1998 Blade movie, Stephen Norrington, began development of The Crow reboot. Norrington, who initially planned to write and direct, outlined that his version of The Crow would be a completely different beast to Proyas's. Norrington wanted to film it almost like a documentary, in stark contrast to the original's gothic stylization. However, However, he left the reboot in 2011 and has not directed a feature film since. Following Norrington's 2011 departure, the role of director on the Crow reboot has also been a revolving door of talent, with many other talented filmmakers previously attached. These include 28 Weeks Later's Juan Carlos Fresnadillo? Nadillo? I don't want to butcher the word. And The Nun's Corin Hardy. Since development began on the Crow reboot in 2008, it's a little cut off there, many actors have also been cast as Eric Draven, including Mark Wahlberg and Aquaman's Jason Momoa. Despite the notability of these actors, all eventually departed the Crow reboot before filming began. It was only after the casting of Bill Skarsgård and the hiring of Rupert Sanders as director that cameras actually rolled on the Crow's reboot. In portraying Eric Draven in The Crow reboot, Bill Skarsgård has an impossible challenge to try and overcome. If Skarsgård attempts to honor Lee's portrayal of Draven, it will completely debunk claims that The Crow reboot is an adaptation of the comic, rather than a remake of Alex Proyas' movie. If he either makes the role his own or takes his cues from the comics, it will inevitably attract criticism that his performance is nothing like the original movie. It's a real catch-22 for Skarsgård, and a possible behind-the-scenes reason as to why so many actors before him, such as Bradley Cooper, have left the Crow reboot. One of the few good decisions that the Crow sequels made was to create a different character to become the titular vigilante in each film. This made those sequels easier to swallow for audiences, given Lee's death, even if it did not save them from being critically reviled for other reasons. Although Eric Draven has previously been played by an actor other than Brandon Lee, Mark Dacascos in The Crow Stairway to Heaven, Bill Skarsgård's performance will be far more in the public eye and under much more scrutiny than Dacascos was. However, given Skarsgård's talent as an actor, it's possible that The Crow reboot could overcome the controversy. All right, I don't know. Like, my personal take on this is, Hollywood, please, if you're listening, leave my teenage and young adult years alone. You've dragged enough of my beloved childhood franchises and films through the mud and out the back alley and done things to them that you only hear horrible stories about in prison. Please stop it. There is no need for there to be a Crow reboot. Now, having said that, my prediction is this is going to fail. Now, to keep it transparent, like I always do, I've always been opposed to this. I've been opposed to a remake of The Crow ever since I heard that they were going to do a remake of The Crow, which was back in 2008 when they started to gain steam with the idea. I've always been opposed to it. And one of the reasons I feel is, and you folks out there who may be in my age bracket, in that like 40 plus age bracket, who may have been around when The Crow originally came out. One of the reasons why I've always been opposed to it is, like the director here, I do believe that The Crow movie, unlike other movies, because of Brandon Lee's up-and-coming stardom, okay, this was going to be his breakout role, okay? He had done other films, like one or two, but this was going to be what propelled him into the mainstream. Much like, how the MCU propelled certain actors that they were always around and had done other things, but it was really their roles in the MCU that brought them into the mainstream and made them a Hollywood A-lister. The Crow was that for Brandon Lee. The fact that he lost his life in making the film, sort of, as Alex Proyas stated, it sort of ties the film forever to him in a way that it's more than just a film. It is sort of like a tribute to him. One of the things, is the very first, at the end of the film, the very first credits you see, the very first thing is the film is dedicated to Brandon and his wife, Eliza. Okay. That's how you know the Alex Proyas and the people who made that film, how much they felt it was Brandon's. It would be the equivalent, okay, and with everything that's going on, especially this weekend, it would be the equivalent of doing a reboot of the original Black Panther movie with Chadwick Boseman. Okay, it would be the same way you sort of tie that film will forever be linked to him. And so any reboot or reimagining or reinterpretation of that original film, okay, sort of takes away from his legacy, from his legacy of work, right? Same thing applies to Brandon Lee with The Crow. The Crow was, for those who may not know, or may be too young to have known this, it was James O'Barr wrote it when he lost a family member to violence. It was his way, it was his coping mechanism, was to sort of write this story of this sort of ability to avenge those who were taken away from us too soon. Okay? The fact that Brandon Lee, this young 20-something-year-old actor, lost his life making the film adaptation to it, it adds an extra weight to it. And I think that's part of why the original Crow was such a hit for people who were in their early 20s, like I was when it came out. It resonated on multiple levels, not just as a cool movie, not just because it had a cool soundtrack, although it did have a fucking amazing soundtrack, but because of all that emotional weight that came with it. It was one of those movies that if you were in your late teens or early 20s at that time, it really was like a gut punch. It was like, here was like one of our generation's stars, and we lost them early. You used to your Hollywood actors. Over the years and the decades, people pass away. It's a natural part of life. But this was like our generation's like first gut punch of like heartache and loss of actors, like someone we was like, ooh, like that's like our guy, and we lost him, and it sort of gave this emotional weight and heaviness to the film. Not to mention the concept of the film, this, having loss, and having someone you love taken from you at a young age and unnaturally, and that want and need to be able to like avenge them and sort of get one more shot at making things right. And so I think because of that, I think that any reboot of The Crow, I don't want to say it would be DOA. I don't think it would do as good as they're expecting it to do, even with somebody like Bill Skarsgård in the role. I don't think it ever can, because I don't think it will have the emotional weight and the emotional impact that the original film had. When the original film, when we saw it, we hadn't seen anything like that before. Okay, it sort of reached to you in a way that was different, and I don't think they're going to be able to capture that. I think that was a one-off, and because of the way the real world sort of intertwined with the film, with the loss of Brandon Lee, I think it'll always be a one-off like that. Like I said, I think the equivalent would be like, do you think, 5 years from now, Disney and Marvel could do a complete reboot of Black Panther, in regard, in light of the passing of Chadwick Boseman? I think that no, I think that will be a role and a film that will be quintessentially tied with him and his legacy forever. And the same thing I feel with Brandon Lee and the original Crow. And that's why I personally, I hope that this doesn't get made. Obviously, they're already working on it. According to the article, they may already be in post-production on it. I think it's going to fail. And I think that's a shame. I could always be wrong, but I think it's going to fail, and I think that's a shame. I think my generation is going to be very skeptical of this film. I don't think you're going to get that sort of fan response that you're thinking that, like, oh well, these people loved it when it came out in 1994, they're going to love it now. I think it may get a fan base amongst younger generation who didn't experience the first one, or may have only seen the first one through streaming or something like that, and just know sort of like the backstory that the lead actor died during and don't really have that emotional investment in it. But hey, that's just my opinion. You guys, let me know what you think down in the comments below. Do you think that The Crow reboot, because they are saying this is a reboot. It is going to retell the original story from the comics perspective, but the original Brandon Lee film did too, although they did change some things like the Skull Cowboy and stuff like that. But let me know what you guys think. Do you think it's, is it something you're interested in seeing? Is it something you think is going to do well? Or do you think, no, the original Crow and Brandon Lee are too intertwined, and it's just one of those things where Hollywood should just leave it alone? Maybe do a X amount anniversary reissue, and like a new digital copy and clean it up and stuff. But otherwise, just leave it alone. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. Remember, if you like the video, give it a like. Feel free to share the video. And subscribe. If you haven't subscribed, give us a subscribe. We're coming up on 400, and that is awesome. It hasn't even been a month yet, and we're already closing in on 400, and that's awesome. I want to keep this thing going, so let's keep rocking it. If you haven't subscribed, hit the subscribe button. If you have subscribed, thank you again for checking in, and I will talk to you guys on the next one. Until then, peace.